Paul opens his heart to a suspicious church. After a painful visit and a severe letter, reconciliation is finally happening. But false apostles have infiltrated, and Paul's response is surprising. He boasts in weakness. This is Seek, Go, Create. Welcome. You're listening to Read the New Testament in 90 Days, 27 books, in order, in context. We're walking through the New Testament the way it was written so you can hear it the way the first churches did. This is so powerful. We have just done 1 Corinthians, and we're going to be moving to 2 Corinthians today. But a quick reminder, make sure if you haven't done it to go get your reading plan. Check out all the resources at k2m.foundation/NT90. There should be links down in the notes area if you're listening to this on the podcast or watching it on YouTube. k2m.foundation/NT90. A lot of great stuff that'll support what we're doing. Again, today's stop, 2 Corinthians, Paul's kind of most personal letter. And here's some key facts. This author, no doubt, is Paul. We believe this was dated in around AD, the first century, 55, 56, sometime in that arena. The audience, once again, is the church in Corinth. They're still recovering from the first letter's confrontation. There was a lot going on there. We should have just finished reading that. The setting, about 26 years post-resurrection. Paul is writing from Macedonia, and it's all about tension and reconciliation. Here's some historical context. Nero's still on the throne. The Roman Empire is at peace. The temple in Jerusalem is still intact. About 14 years from now, from the time that we, as this audience, receive this letter, it'll be destroyed. But we don't know that. We now know that because we can look back on it. But about 14 years that the temple has left before it is gone. The church, this group that we're sitting with, this group that we're trying to gain context from being in there, after 1 Corinthians, and it wasn't earmarked 1 Corinthians at that time, by the way, it was probably a letter from Paul. We call it 1 Corinthians, but things got worse after that first letter. Oh my goodness, before they got better. There was an emergency visit, a public confrontation, and then a wounded departure. Here's the tension. A severe letter was sent via Titus. Months of anxious waiting. Finally, good news. They repented, but now something else has come. False apostles have arrived. Why now? Why is this letter being written now? Paul writes to celebrate reconciliation and reveal what real power looks like. Just to connect it. Back in Mark, we looked at, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. Paul applies that when he talks about his weakness and comparing himself to what's going on with the other teacher preachers that people are comparing him to and what they're saying about him. He talks about what real power looks like, why it matters. Resurrection redefines power, overcoming death. Paul's opponents boast in credentials and impressive experiences. Paul boasts in beatings, shipwrecks, and a thorn in the flesh. Why? Because resurrection power doesn't need impressive packaging. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead works through broken and weak vessels. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. That's the upside down logic of the kingdom. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. What you'll encounter, 2 Corinthians is raw and vulnerable. Paul opens his heart. You'll hear about comfort in affliction, not really what a lot of Christians want to hear about. The God of all comfort who comforts us so we can comfort others. New covenant ministry, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. Glory that doesn't fade. Treasure in jars of clay. We carry the gospel in extremely fragile vessels. Reconciliation, this word's going to come up again in some other writings of Paul. God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. The severe letter, Paul's anguish and relief when they repented. And then, of course, there's the false apostles, the super apostles who preach credentials. Paul preaches the cross. Boasting in weakness, we talked about this earlier, beatings, shipwrecks, sleepless nights, the thorn in the flesh. You'll hear about all of that here in 2 Corinthians. And then, of course, my grace is sufficient. Power made perfect in weakness, the upside down logic of the kingdom. Strength through weakness does not make sense in the world system, in the kingdom of Rome, and really it doesn't make sense in the Jewish temple structure. But in this new kingdom that Jesus Christ has brought, that has its foundation in the resurrection, there is strength in weakness. That's one of the key messages of 2 Corinthians. So enjoy this reading. This is 2 Corinthians. You're going to read 2 Corinthians over the next 6 sessions, a few chapters a day. Have fun with it. Next, we get to the power of Romans, arguably Paul's most famous letter. And there's a lot going on with the letter that he writes to the Romans. All right. Before you read, now let's set the scene for 2 Corinthians. It's AD 56. Paul is in Macedonia when he finally exhales. Titus brought the news he'd been desperate to hear. The Corinthians repented. The breach is healing. But there's a new problem. Smooth-talking teachers have arrived in Corinth, flashing credentials and questioning Paul's authority. They call themselves apostles. They boast in visions and power. Paul picks up his pen. What follows is his most vulnerable letter. He'll open his heart, he'll catalog his sufferings, and he'll make a claim that would have baffled any Roman. Power is made perfect in weakness. Now, let's read.